Hey, this is Bryce and thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel, Jack of Trades. Today we're going to continue our video build series where we are assembling an HPI Baja 5B Flux. So in our last video we married the front end to the chassis, we assembled the battery radio box with the steering servo, and then we installed that in the chassis as well. The next phase of the build will be to build the rear end of the vehicle with the rear suspension, the gearbox, the uprights for the shocks. And then I believe that gets married to the rear of the chassis, and we start adding the components for the motor, the chassis braces, and then after that I think it's the roll cage, and then shocks and wheels. But this video will basically cover this back end of the vehicle. We'll see how far we can get in a reasonable amount of time. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and flip the camera around and we'll get going on the build. So in the last video we left off at step 11 for the Flux portion of the build. I think that was in the 60s somewhere. So this is where we left off in the last video. And the next step is telling us to go to stage 44 on page 26. So this is where we start to assemble the rear bulkheads, beginning with some nut installation into the nut blocks. So we got our bulkhead, and it says to go ahead and open up bag D as well. Got a motor plate. This does not get used. This is for the gas version of the build. Bottom chassis plate. Moving on to this step, we need 4 of the M5 nuts and 2 of the M3 nuts. Or I'm sorry, 6 of the M5 nuts. This is the front rear bulkhead. This is the rear bulkhead. Moving on to step 46. So there's 2 hinge plates here. There's one that has holes, countersunk holes for mounting to the rear bulkhead, and this one goes on the front rear bulkhead. I missed a step in 45, so going back to 45, these nut blocks you need to install, and basically you need to match the profile of that cavity. And you just push them in as far as they'll go. Okay, we'll do the same on the rear bulkhead, except in this case you just kind of want to center it, and you want the holes to line up. Okay, so these are ready to get bolted onto the rear chassis plate. Alright, so towards the rear of the vehicle should be vertical, and that lines up those holes on the bottom. We'll use the longer countersunk flathead screws on the bottom. So you want this to kind of lean towards the back of the vehicle. Like that. So the hinge pin plate kind of drops in, snaps in. If that doesn't snap in, you'll need to loosen these screws to get it in, and then we use the shorter 2 screws to bolt that in. And that completes step 46. So now moving on to step 47, we'll be installing the rear arms with the hinge pins and the front hinge pin plate. As you said in previous videos, we're using the RPM suspension arms. So when you put the arms in, this is where the shock mounts. You want that towards the rear of the vehicle. Actually, we'll pre-install the clips on one end. If we can. Okay, and we'll go ahead and Put on this front hinge pin plate. Slide that in. So get the arm in there. Kind of line up those holes and push it forward and scratch up your chassis. So maybe not such a good idea to do it that way. I scratched up the chassis there. So as I said on the other, I like to get them started and you push down on the pin and it kind of captures the clip so the clip doesn't go anywhere. And now I can just bring this home with some pliers, but it reduces the risk of it flying away. So on this one we'll get the clip started and push down on the pin so it's somewhat captured, and I can bring it home with that. Moving on to the next step. In 48 we are assembling the rear hub carrier assembly. Alright, so let's get this out of the way. We need to get our rear hubs. So they want us to use thread lock on this next part. So we put drive shaft in. They want us to use thread lock kind of on the drive shaft, as well as that cross pin. I've never used thread lock on this part, so but I don't know the purpose of it. Maybe it kind of locks up and prevents the vibration. Sometimes you can have vibration issues where these pins fall out. This stuff screws for locking that cross pin. So make sure the cross pin is flush on both sides so it doesn't stick out. And what you can do is you can use a driver on this on the drive shaft to hold it in place while you tighten that screw. It doesn't have to be crazy tight. If you go too tight, you'll probably put a divot in the pin and then it'll be hard to take that pin out later. You see here, that takes us to step 49, where we install the hub carriers to the lower arms. So we'll need the hinge pins. And actually these hub carriers are new to me. I think they were introduced in the SC truck. I remember seeing that from someone else's video. The Baja short course, which I never had one. But it's a nice design because these blocks that go in there change the toe of the rear wheels. So each block has a different angle built into it for the hinge pin. So I guess we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if that is associated with degrees, but maybe. They're telling you to use number 4 in there, which is 4 degrees toe. Sure, why not? I'm just going to build it to the manual for now. So we'll use the number 4, which has the 4 dashes on it. So as you look at that block and you put the pin through, you can see the angle of that pin going through. I suppose that could be 4 degrees. So we want the grooves, the notches need to go towards the rear of the vehicle. So I guess before we install those, let's go ahead and put these retaining set screws in. Okay, so basically I'm sighting down the bore of the hinge pin. You're not gonna be able to see it, but I'm sighting down that bore until I can just see a dimple forming from the set screw. And then I'm going to double check to make sure. See, I can't get my hinge pin in at that point. So I'm going to back that off a little bit so I can get my hinge pin through there. I suppose you could come back and tighten that a little bit too to help kind of retain the hinge pin. So grooves towards the rear. moving on to step 50, we're going to be assembling the differential. So we can get this out of the way. Lots of parts in this bag. We got our main gear, differential gear, some big bearings for the differential, some bushings. So the Baja uses a viscous diff, and that's what these plates are. They're kind of viscous plates. So it comes with a 1,000 weight diff oil, which we'll go ahead and use for now. Nice. The original Baja had plastic diff cases. So I think by the time they were doing the SS kit, they upgraded to the aluminum diff cases. They're using thread lock on the outer bearing. Fair enough. Let's go and put that O-ring in there. And that ball bearing goes on the outside. So you really want to install this as straight as possible so you don't bugger up that hole. If you can, if you have access to a press or a vise, use it. I'm going to go use my vise to press this on. Right. So it's seated properly now. Do the same thing to the other half. So now you want to put a little bit of oil on this. So this plate goes in like that, and then we put that pin in there. The pin has to go through this hole here. So this hole serves two purposes. One, it's for inserting this pin, but it's also for filling up the differential once you have it sealed up. So we'll just push that pin in like so. You can rotate it so it doesn't fall out at that point. We'll try to center it, and then we'll install the larger bevel gear. That pin has to be centered in order for that gear to drop in. Okay. There. Like so. And then there's a screw for capturing that pin. So let's go ahead and install those plugs in. So there's a screw, and then little O-rings to seal those screws up. So you can see the O-ring and the screw. Oh, I almost lost the screw there. Make sure you don't pinch that O-ring when you install that plug. Alright, let's move on to the rest of the differential. So we got these gears here. And when you drop these in, you want to drop them in so the curved part here is facing up and down, so you can see how that's going in there. That's what it should look like when it's done. And that's step 51. So moving on to step 52, we install these pins here. So these pins are notched. When they're in the diff, one will be facing up, one will be facing down. So just keep that in mind. The notch is facing up on that pin. You can see that notch, the flat on the notch. And then the other pin you'll want to install with the notch facing down. Now we move on to step 53, where we fill up the diff half with oil. So rotating kind of helps circulate that oil into the cavities. And I'm starting to see it creep up on the outside. So that looks good. And that takes us to step 54, where we assemble the two diff halves. One half has thicker threaded holes, tabs with threaded holes. The other is a thinner tab with through holes. So the ring gear comes in, and the ring gear has a direction as well, but that comes in as part of the sandwich. And you'd screw in from here. But basically, when it's assembled, you want your ring gear to be centered on the differential. So just check for that. And that concludes step 54. So now we move on to step 55, where we insert these nuts into these nut plates that get inserted into the transmission case. Alright, and that's step 55. 56, we assemble the lace shaft. So I'll put that cross pin in. Gear slides on in that direction, and then the clip goes on to retain that gear. The screw is used to retain the that cross pin. Step 57, we are assembling the gearbox with the components that we've already prepared. So one of the things that is easy to forget is this little plug here. You don't want to forget that because that gets installed from the inside of the gearbox. It's easy to forget. So that plug goes in here, like so. That is a tight fit. You kind of have to walk in that bearing. Might have been easier to put the bearing on first. Let's do that. Alright. Yep. And then what? Okay, we got our shaft here. Go ahead and do that. So, okay, and our differential. Let's just make sure we're not forgetting anything because we're in no rush here. So take our time. We almost forgot these, the nut plates. They go in there, like so. The next step, 58. We're putting on this brake hub installation. Moving on to step 59, we're going to go ahead and install the drive shafts and the gearbox into the chassis. So we need to open up bag G. Bag G is the drive shafts and the upper rear hinge pins. And that is our transmission installed. Now we'll get these drive shafts installed. Look how massive these dog bones are. Alright, so we'll put a little grease on these. And then we'll slide the boots, dog bone boots, onto the cups. Then we move on to step 60, where we start installing nuts into the braces for the rear shock stays. Okay, that's step 60. Moving on to step 61, which is the shock tower installation. Alright, so I had to pull out a classic Allen wrench to be able to get to this screw here. I don't remember what I did before. Okay, I'm going to swing that up so it's approximately, you know, as an aid we could use a hinge pin to kind of keep things in place while we screw this guy in. Okay, let's do the other side. And as part of step 61, we want to go ahead and put these braces in. So one end tucks up inside here in this tower. The other end comes down to this rear bulkhead. Then we use the longer screws to screw those into the bulkhead. Moving on to step 62, we're going to do some more nut blocks. So that's step 62. Then we move on to step 63. Alright, so we're pressing some balls into the rod ends. So the rod end is number 1 on that tree. That pops right in. And that is step 63. Moving on to step 64, we're going to assemble the rear upper control arms. So these, we're going to use the RPM arms. Alright, so we do have a left and a right also, and these have an angle to them. The straight side of the arm is going to go towards the front of the vehicle with this curving up. So this would be on the left hand side, then this would be our right hand side, and I need to flip this over like so. We got 11.5, 11.6 on one side, 11.7, but there's nothing I can do about that. I think in the other direction it will be too much. You can try it. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, we're 12.6. So kind of splitting the difference in error. Step 65, we go ahead and install these upper control arms. So we got the hinge pins already out, and then we use these large button head screws here. Alright, so this is a pretty easy step. You slide that hinge pin out. You want a little portion of this will stick out because this gets covered by the rear roll cage. So that's fine the way it is there. And then we'll do the other side. And then we've got these little nut plates that we did up, or nut blocks. So you want to flip them over so the nut's on the bottom, and then they just insert like so. Well, actually for this step we'll put this off to the side, and then we will do these sway bar linkage assemblies. left and a right. Alright, so now we install the ball. That's step 66. Step 67, we install the balls to the lower arms. So in these guys, you want them to face again towards the inside of the vehicle. So right now we're flipped around because we're upside down, but this is the left hand side of the car, this is the right hand side. So when we install this one, it's going to go down, and with it being parallel to the arm, this will face towards the center of the vehicle. So now in 68, we're going to install the actual sway bar. Alright, there we go. And just make sure you're not hitting the boots. It's close, but they're not actually touching. You don't want to be touching. And this is the motion you should see. When you lift one end, the other end should lift with it. And that concludes step 68. So now we're getting into the rear roll cage. In the next step, we install the rear roll cage. You straighten them out once you get them screwed in, and then this inserts into here. So you got on the end of that cage, there's holes for the hinge pins, and it just slides over those hinge pins, and then the little nut bosses, these guys fall into the slots, so eventually we'll screw in from the top when we get the top plate in there. For now, we just have these two screws to screw the cage in from the bottom. We go on to stage 12 or step 12 on page 65 for the flux portion of this build. And let's just look through this a little bit. So we're going to have us install the top plate. Then we're going to start to do these side plates. Then we'll do the side plate to the rear chassis plate. Then we got the motor installation, drivetrain. I think we're at a good stopping point for this video. This video is getting long, so I'm going to call that a wrap on this part of the video. And the next part we'll get into the flux portion of this build, where we basically finish up this rear chassis plate. Or the rear end of the car, and then we marry it to the main chassis. But yeah, another video, another day. We're getting closer to having a finished car. So it's getting exciting. You can imagine, that plate comes in here like that. So that's what we're dealing with. Starting to take up a lot of bench space. It's a big car. Yeah, anywho, thanks for watching. Have a good one.